I gave her everything, and she just took it and betrayed me. I was coming up the stairs hearing moans from my bedroom, and what I saw. When I met Maple at a little bookstore in Los Angeles over 27 years ago, I never imagined our love story would bring us here. We'd built a life together. A charming house in a suburban enclave, two smart, albeit mischievous, sons, and routines that felt like second nature. At 52, my life seemed well orchestrated, moving to the rhythm of work, family, and Maple's endless passion for yoga and Pilates. Maple had always been a housewife, a role she embraced with flair. She loved her weight loss TV shows, shared baking recipes with neighbors, and, most notably, went to yoga and Pilates religiously. When she wasn't at home, she was at the gym. She'd rave about her sessions and her charismatic trainer, Ethan. His ability to inspire, to motivate, to help people reconnect with their bodies. I listened, smiling faintly, though something about her frequent mentions of Ethan made me uneasy. About a month ago, she insisted I join one of her yoga sessions. "Harry, you're too tense all the time," she said, brushing lint off my blazer as I prepared for work. "Come with me. Ethan's class will do you wonders." I finally relented, more to placate her than anything else. But from the moment we entered the studio, I felt out of place. Ethan greeted us with an over-the-top warmth that seemed to drip with familiarity. His smile lingered on Maple just a moment too long. During class, I watched as he adjusted her poses with gentle, lingering touches. Something stirred in me, a prickly feeling I couldn't shake. But when I mentioned it later, Maple just laughed. "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Harry," she said, dismissing my concerns with a wave of her hand. "Ethan's gay. He's more interested in you than me." She smirked, planting a kiss on my cheek. Her explanation seemed plausible enough, but the unease didn't leave me. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle changes. Maple started scheduling private sessions with Ethan at our house. She claimed it was more convenient. Besides, she said, he's been helping me refine my form. The boys, Sean and Oliver, were oblivious to my concerns, or perhaps they just didn't care. They had their own issues, constantly testing boundaries and leaving me to play the bad cop. When I didn't bend to their whims, they found ways to retaliate, like borrowing my car without permission or slipping who knows what into my drink at a family barbecue. Their antics only added to the storm brewing inside me. One evening, after a particularly draining day at work, I came home to find Ethan leaving through the front door. He looked startled when he saw me, then recovered quickly with a broad grin. "Maple's really making progress," he said, patting me on the shoulder as he left. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. Little did I know, that moment would be the first crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew. A few weeks ago, Maple suggested I join her for one of Ethan's yoga sessions again. This time, it wasn't at the studio but at our house. "It's just more convenient," she said, flashing me a reassuring smile. "You'll see how much more relaxed you feel afterward." I wasn't entirely thrilled. Yoga hadn't exactly been my thing the first time around, but I agreed. If nothing else, I thought it might help ease the tension I'd been carrying around from work. When Ethan arrived, he greeted me like an old friend. "Harry, great to see you again. I hope you're ready to let go of some of that office stress today." His enthusiasm felt genuine enough, but it still grated on me in a way I couldn't quite explain. We started the session in the living room, where Maple had rearranged the furniture to make space for our mats. As we moved through the poses, I couldn't help but notice the effortless camaraderie between her and Ethan. They joked and laughed, sharing a rhythm that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. "Great form, Maple," Ethan said, stepping closer to adjust her alignment. His hands lingered on her shoulders a moment too long. "You've really been progressing." "Thanks to you," Maple replied, her voice light and full of warmth. When it was my turn for corrections, Ethan kept his distance, offering instructions from across the room. I stumbled through another pose, earning a chuckle from Maple. By the end of the session, they were deep in conversation about her progress and goals. I stood off to the side, towel in hand, feeling oddly like a guest in my own house. As Ethan packed up his things, he turned to me with a grin. "You're getting there, Harry. Keep it up, and you'll be a pro in no time." I forced a smile and nodded, but But as I watched him leave, I couldn't shake the unease creeping into my chest. Later that evening, I mentioned how comfortable they seemed together. Ethan is just a company guy. Don't think anything of it. He just taught me to tune in to positive vibrations. That's why we get along so well. Her laughter echoed in my ears long after we went to bed. Something about it felt hollow. Life at home always had its quirks. Sean, our oldest, had just turned 21 but was still figuring things out. He had a knack for ambition that often burned out before it got anywhere. Oliver, 17, was the complete opposite, content to coast through life, charming his way out of trouble with a grin that could rival Maple's. They were good kids, though. Challenging, yes, but what kids weren't? One evening, after dinner, Oliver bounded down the stairs with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Dad," Sean and I were thinking, "what if we take the car to the beach tomorrow? It's perfect weather." I raised an eyebrow, already suspicious. Whose idea was this? And why do I feel like it involves something you're not telling me? Sean smirked, lounging on the couch. "Relax, Dad. We just want to go for the sunset. Nothing crazy. We'll even fill the tank. Last time you two said that, you came back at midnight with an empty tank and sand in places I didn't even know cars had," I shot back. "Come on, Dad," Oliver pleaded, his voice dripping with exaggerated innocence. "It's not like we're asking to borrow the house or something." The mention of the house drew my thoughts back to Ethan and the yoga sessions Maple kept scheduling. It seemed like he was here more often than before, his visits overlapping with my work hours. I hadn't said anything, but it gnawed at me. Shaking off the thought, I looked back at my sons. "All right, but you're back by 10. If you're not, I'm setting up GPS tracking on that car so fast your heads will spin." "Deal." Oliver grinned, giving Sean a high five. The next day, while Maple hosted another private session with Ethan, I took the chance to catch up on paperwork in the den. Their laughter filtered through the walls, cheerful and unassuming, but it still made my chest tighten. Just as I was getting lost in my spreadsheets, Sean and Oliver burst in, full of energy from their beach trip. "Dad, you wouldn't believe the waves." Sean started, tossing his bag onto the floor. "And the parking ticket," Oliver added sheepishly, holding up a slip of paper. I groaned, rubbing my temples. "You were gone 3 hours. How did you manage to get a ticket?" Oliver shrugged. "It's a skill." Despite my annoyance, I couldn't help but laugh. They had a way of diffusing tension, reminding me that life wasn't always so heavy. But later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't ignore the other side of my thoughts, the one circling back to Maple. The ease with which she'd embraced Ethan's presence, the way she glowed after their sessions, even the tiniest changes in her routine. They all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to put together. For now, though, I focused on the moment. My son's laughter still echoing in the house, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, I was overthinking everything. It had been a while since I'd had a chance to catch up with my two closest friends, Doug and Will. We'd been a trio since our college days, weathering each other's highs and lows with equal parts loyalty and humor. They'd always been my sounding board, and tonight, I needed them more than ever. We met at Doug's place, a cozy man cave tucked behind his house that his wife called Doug's Fortress of Solitude. Leather armchairs surrounded a heavy oak table, and the faint smell of cigar smoke lingered in the air. A bottle of Glenfiddich 18 sat in the center, its amber glow promising comfort. "So," Doug began, pouring generous glasses for each of us, "what's been eating at you, Harry? You look like you've been carrying a boulder on your back." Will leaned back, swirling his glass. "Yeah, man, you've got that I've got a secret but fling vibe. Spill it." I hesitated, the words tangled in my throat. Sharing my suspicions out loud felt like crossing a line I wasn't ready for. But these were my best friends. If anyone could handle the mess brewing in my mind, it was them. "It's Maple," I finally said, my voice heavier than I intended. Doug raised an eyebrow, but Will's expression softened with curiosity. "What about her?" Doug asked, leaning forward. I sighed, gripping my glass. "She's been different lately. I don't know, maybe I'm imagining things, but there's this guy, her yoga trainer, Ethan. She's been spending a lot of time with him." Doug snorted. "Yoga guy? Let me guess. He's all flexible and charming? Something like that, I said, my jaw tightening. Will, always the more analytical one, tilted his head. Different how? Like, distant? Or too friendly? A little of both, I admitted. She lights up when she talks about him. And these private sessions she's been having, they're constant now. I don't know. It just feels off. Doug leaned back with a whistle. You think something's going on? I don't know, I said, my frustration spilling out. She says he's gay, but even if that's true, their closeness, it's not sitting right with me. Will nodded slowly. Trust your gut, man. It's usually right. But you've got to be smart about this. If you accuse her without proof, it's just gonna blow up. Doug lifted his glass. And if you're wrong, you'll be the bad guy for even doubting her. I stared into the whiskey, their words swirling alongside my thoughts. Yeah, I said finally. I need to figure this out before I do anything stupid. The conversation shifted after that, moving to lighter topics. Work, the kids, old college stories. For a while, I felt normal again, the camaraderie and laughter easing the weight on my shoulders. But as I drove home later that night, the knot in my stomach tightened again. I knew they were right. I needed clarity. But how far was I willing to go to find it? The following Monday, I sat in my office in downtown LA, staring at a stack of paperwork I couldn't focus on. The conversation with Doug, and Will replayed in my head like a broken record. Trust your gut, they'd said. But my gut was tied in knots, and the longer I waited, the worse it got. I'd always prided myself on being a problem solver. At work, I managed teams, deadlines, and million-dollar budgets with precision. But this felt like a puzzle I couldn't piece together on my own. That's when I made the decision to hire a private investigator. His name was Pete Grayson. I found him through a friend of Doug's, a retired cop who swore Pete was the best in the business. We met at a diner near my office, the kind of place where no one asks questions. Pete was a wiry man in his 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He sipped his coffee as I laid out my concerns. My wife, Maple, I began, hesitating. She's been acting different, spending a lot of time with her yoga trainer, Ethan. They're close, too close, I think. But she insists there's nothing to worry about. Pete nodded, jotting notes on a small pad. You want me to find out if there's more to it? I exhaled. Yeah, I need to know the truth. I've got a lot on my plate at work, and I can't afford to make assumptions or rush into anything without proof. He studied me for a moment before nodding. Fair enough. I'll keep it discreet. Follow her. Watch her interactions. If there's anything to find, I'll find it. We discussed logistics, and I handed him a photo of Maple along with details of her routines. As he slid the photo into his folder, I felt a pang of guilt. Was I overstepping? But I shook it off. Better to know than to live in the dark. For the rest of the week, I buried myself in work. Meetings, presentations, and deadlines kept me busy, but my mind constantly wandered to Pete's investigation. Every time I picked up my phone, I half expected a message from him. Finally, on Friday afternoon, Pete called. Mr. Holloway, he said, his tone calm but serious. I've got something you'll want to see. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? My heart sank, though I couldn't say why. Yeah, I replied. Where? He gave me an address, and I agreed to meet him at his office. As I hung up, I stared out the window of my high-rise, the LA skyline sprawling beneath me. Whatever Pete had found, I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. But ready or not, the truth was coming, and there was no turning back. Saturday morning arrived, and I found myself parked outside Pete Grayson's nondescript office, my stomach churning. The fluorescent open sign in the window flickered faintly, matching the nervous energy in my chest. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped inside. Pete greeted me with his usual calm demeanor, his sharp eyes betraying no emotion. Harry, he said, motioning to a chair across from his desk. Take a seat. I sat, trying to project confidence, though I felt like a teenager caught sneaking in after curfew. Pete reached into a manila folder on his desk, pulling out a series of photos. I've got something, he said, spreading them out in front of me. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. The images showed Maple leaving a coffee shop I didn't recognize, her head tilted toward someone out of frame. Another photo captured her laughing, a genuine smile lighting up her face, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. The next photo hit me like a punch to the gut. It showed her with Ethan, standing by her car. His hand rested on her arm, not in a professional way, but something softer, intimate. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands clenching into fists on the table. Where was this? Not far from your house, Pete said. But here's where it gets interesting. He slid over a final photo, and my stomach turned. Maple wasn't with Ethan this time. Instead, she was sitting at an outdoor cafe with a man I didn't recognize, a sharply dressed guy, maybe in his early 40s. They were leaning in close, her hand resting on his forearm as they talked. Who's this? I demanded, pointing at the stranger. Pete shook his head. Don't know yet. I'm working on identifying him. All I can tell you is they met twice this week. Once at the cafe, and once at the park. The interaction seemed personal. Personal. The word echoed in my head, sharp and cutting. I stared at the photos, a mix of anger and confusion swirling in my chest. So, what? She's juggling two guys now? Ethan and this mystery man? Pete shrugged, his expression neutral. Could be. Or maybe this new guy has nothing to do with Ethan. Either way, it's worth digging deeper. I exhaled, sitting back in my chair. The photos raised more questions than they answered, and my emotions threatened to spill over. But I forced myself to stay composed. No more acting like some insecure kid unsure of his place. Keep following her, I said firmly. I want to know everything. Where she goes, who she sees, what she says. No more shadows. Pete nodded, his respect evident in his steady gaze. You've got it. Driving home, the photos burned in my mind. The Maple in those pictures felt like a stranger, a version of her I didn't know. But the anger simmering inside me wasn't the helpless fury of a man broken. It was focused, sharp, determined. If Maple was hiding something, I'd find out. And this time, I wouldn't be the fool waiting in the wings. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. Its frame splintered as if someone had forced their way inside. My heart pounded as I rushed to the entrance, every worst-case scenario racing through my mind. Inside, the house was in shambles. Furniture overturned, cushions strewn across the floor, and shattered glass glinting in the faint afternoon light. Sean, Oliver, I called, panic surging through me. My voice echoed back, unanswered. Then I saw them. Both boys lay sprawled on the living room floor, motionless. My stomach dropped, and I ran to them, my knees hitting the floor hard as I reached for Sean. Sean! I shook him gently. No response. My hands moved to Oliver, patting his face. Oliver, wake up. Their breathing was steady but shallow, and it was then I noticed the smell, sharp and earthy, unmistakable. Marijuana. The stench hung in the air, thick and cloying, like a bad joke playing out in slow motion. I exhaled, a mix of relief and exasperation flooding me. This wasn't a robbery. It was a teenage party gone horribly wrong. Leaving them on the floor for the moment, I pushed further into the house, navigating the mess. The smell grew stronger as I moved toward the bedroom hallway, where faint moans reached my ears. I froze. Was that Maple? The thought made my body tense. My chest tightened, and a wave of unease washed over me. Could it all unravel like this? Would this be the moment where everything came to light? I steeled myself and stepped closer to the bedroom, the sounds growing louder. But when I swung the door open, it wasn't Maple I found. It was Oliver's friend, Ryan, entangled with a girl on my bed. The scene hit me like a slap. My bed, my sanctuary, defiled by teenage stupidity. Ryan froze, wide-eyed like a deer caught in headlights. His girlfriend yelped, clamping down in panic. What the hell is going on here? I roared, the words exploding out of me before I could stop them. Ryan scrambled to cover himself, his movements frantic. I am sorry, Mr. Holloway. We didn't mean. Didn't mean? I interrupted, my voice echoing off the walls. Get out of my house right now. But the girl whimpered, clutching her stomach. I can't. I'm stuck. she whispered, her face pale. It took me a second to process her words, but when I did, I groaned inwardly. This is all I needed. We had to call an ambulance. I stayed in the hallway while the paramedics handled the delicate situation, my face burning with a mix of anger and embarrassment. The look they gave me as they carried the girl out didn't help. Once the chaos died down, I found Sean groaning, struggling to sit up in the living room. What happened? I asked, my patience worn thin. Sean blinked at me, his eyes bloodshot. We had some friends over. Guess things got out of hand. Out of hand, I repeated, gesturing to the mess around us. You think? He mumbled something incoherent, barely able to stay upright. I sighed deeply, my frustration tempered by the exhaustion in his face. This is going to cost you, Sean. Both of you, I said, standing over him. Clean this up, every bit of it, and we're going to have a very long talk when you're sober. As I walked away, rubbing my temples, I couldn't help but think, as if I didn't have enough to deal with already. Sunday morning came, and the house was quiet for the first time in what felt like weeks. The boys were holed up in their rooms after a stern lecture and several threats of grounding, and the mess from the party had been mostly cleaned up. My mind, however, was anything but calm. Pete hadn't called with any new updates, and I was left stewing over the photos, the questions, and the chaos. Maple, oblivious to everything, was in the kitchen humming a tune as she prepared her morning tea. That's when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Ethan standing on the porch, looking disheveled. His usual charm and poise were gone, replaced by a nervous energy that set me on edge. Ethan, I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, he said, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. My first instinct was to tell him to leave, but something about his expression stopped me. I stepped aside, letting him in. We sat in the living room, the remnants of the boys' chaos still visible despite my best efforts to restore order. Ethan hesitated before speaking, wringing his hands. Harry, I know this might seem out of the blue, but I felt like I owed you an explanation, he began. About what? I asked, narrowing my eyes. He took a deep breath. About Maple and me. Look, I'm sure you've been suspicious, but whatever you think is going on, it's not what it looks like. I'm gay, Harry. I have been my whole life. For a moment, I didn't respond, the weight of his words sinking in. Maple hadn't lied. She hadn't been hiding some torrid affair with Ethan after all. I don't know what to say, I admitted, leaning back in my chair. Relief mixed with confusion, leaving me off balance. There's more, Ethan said, his voice lowering. It's not Maple you should be worried about. It's someone else. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Ethan hesitated, as though weighing whether he should say anything at all. She's been meeting someone, a man named Adam. He's not just a friend. I've seen them together, Harry. They're close. Too close. Adam, the man from the photos. Are you sure? I asked, my voice taut. Ethan nodded solemnly. I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't stay quiet. Maple's a good person, but this guy, he's no good. I just thought you should know. I stared at him, my thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief. Maple hadn't betrayed me with Ethan, but now there was another name, another face, a stranger who suddenly seemed to be at the center of everything. After Ethan left, I sat in silence, piecing it all together. This revelation didn't bring clarity. It only added another layer of questions to a situation I thought I was beginning to understand. Who was Adam? And what did he want with my wife? That evening, as I sat nursing a headache from the chaos at home, Pete called. His timing, as always, was impeccable. I've got an update, he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. Can you talk? Yeah, I replied, leaning back in my chair. Let me guess, it's about the guy in the photos with Maple. Pete didn't skip a beat. His name's Adam. Ring a bell? My grip on the phone tightened. Adam? As in Adam Givens? He works with Derek Stone. Correct, Pete confirmed. And he's not just any employee. He's a protege of Stone's, practically groomed to be your direct competition. Word is, he's ambitious, cutthroat, and not above playing dirty to get what he wants. I let that sink in, my thoughts spinning. Derek Stone had been my rival for years. Ever since he swooped in on a major account I'd been courting, we'd butted heads ever since, though it had always been professional. Or so I thought. Why would Adam be hanging around Maple? I asked, though dread was already pooling in my stomach. Pete's sigh crackled over the line. Because he's using her, Harry. From what I can gather, he's pulling strings, keeping her compliant while feeding her exactly what she wants. And in return, he's getting close to you, through her. My jaw clenched. Compliant how? He's giving her the attention she's craving, both emotionally and physically, Pete explained. Let's face it, he's younger, charming, and he's probably offering her things you don't, or can't, at this point in your marriage. The words hit like a blow to the chest, knocking the air out of me. You're saying this is about sex? Partly, yeah, Pete said bluntly, but it's bigger than that. Adam's not just after your wife. He's after you. Your job, your reputation, your stability. If he can rattle you, make you lose focus, it's game over. He's playing the long game, Harry, and he's good at it. I stared at the wall, a cold anger building in my chest. This wasn't just infidelity. This was manipulation on a scale I couldn't have imagined. Adam wasn't just exploiting Maple's vulnerabilities. He was weaponizing them against me. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice low. Months, maybe longer, Pete replied. Their meetings have been discreet, and Adam's been careful. He's keeping himself just far enough from Maple to avoid suspicion, but close enough to keep control. I gritted my teeth. And Ethan? Pete chuckled dryly. Believe it or not, Ethan's exactly what Maple said he was, a gay yoga instructor. He's got no part in this. Whatever tension you've been feeling about him is a red herring. Adam's the real problem here. I let out a bitter laugh. So I've been chasing the wrong lead while Adam's been playing us both. Pete didn't respond, letting the silence settle for a moment before speaking again. What's your next move, Harry? I ran a hand through my hair, my mind already racing with possibilities. I'm not sure yet, but if Adam thinks he can dismantle my life, he's about to find out just how wrong he is. Good, Pete said, because I have a feeling this is going to get messy. When I hung up, the weight of what I'd learned pressed down on me. Maple's betrayal was bad enough, but to know she was a pawn in someone else's game, that cut even deeper. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about everything I'd built, my career, my family, my integrity, and I wasn't going to let Adam take it without a fight. The next morning, Pete called again, and this time, he was practically giddy. Harry, I've got something you're going to love. Adam's not just gunning for you. He's playing a double game. Turns out, he's working behind the scenes to edge out his mentor, Derek Stone. I straightened in my chair. What do you mean? Pete explained that Adam had been quietly undermining Stone's business interests, siphoning clients and setting up meetings to pitch himself as the true visionary. He's not just ambitious, he's reckless, Pete said. I've got the emails, the financials, the whole sordid trail. It didn't take long for me to decide on my next step. I reached out to Derek Stone directly. The man was my rival, sure, but we'd always respected each other as professionals. And if there was one thing I knew about Stone, it was that he despised disloyalty. We met at an upscale steakhouse in downtown LA, neutral ground for what was about to be a career-altering conversation. As we sat across from each other, I laid out everything Pete had uncovered. At first, Stone was skeptical, his sharp eyes narrowing as he listened. But as I handed over the evidence, copies of Adam's emails, records of client poaching, and details of his plans to seize Stone's position, his expression darkened. I'll be damned, Stone muttered, flipping through the documents. That little weasel's been under my nose this whole time. You're not the only one he's been targeting, I said. He's been using Maple to distract me while he tried to tear down my company. Stone slammed the folder shut. Well, Harry, I owe you one. Consider Adam's career over. True to his word, Stone moved swiftly. By the end of the week, Adam was out of a job and facing potential legal action for breaching non-compete agreements. Stone even called a few key clients to personally vouch for me, repairing the damage Adam had tried to do. With Adam neutralized, I turned my attention back to Maple. The confrontation I'd been dreading was now inevitable. That evening, I sat her down in the living room. She looked nervous, fiddling with her hands as I spoke. "I know about Adam," I said, my tone calm but firm. "And I know how he used you." Her eyes filled with tears, and she started to speak, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish," I said. "I'm angry, Maple. Angry that you didn't come to me when you felt neglected. Angry that you let someone like Adam manipulate you. But I'm not perfect either." She blinked, her tears spilling over. "Harry." I took a deep breath, the words heavy but necessary. "Years ago, I had an affair. It was brief, and it ended before it could destroy what we had. But it was still a betrayal, and I never told you. I'm not saying this to justify what you did, just to show that I'm not without fault." Maple stared at me, her expression a mix of shock and sorrow. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said softly, "but I think we've both let things fester for too long. If we want to move forward, we need to be honest, with ourselves and each other." She nodded, wiping her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Harry, for everything." "I know," I said, "and I'm willing to forgive you if you're willing to forgive me. But we can't keep doing this. We need to rebuild what we've lost, together." The conversation was painful, but it ended with something I hadn't felt in years: hope. In the weeks that followed, Maple and I began the slow work of repairing our marriage. Counseling sessions helped us confront the issues we'd ignored, and for the first time in years, we started to feel like a team again. As for Sean and Oliver, the incident with their friend served as a wake-up call. They cleaned up their act, at least for now, and even pitched in around the house without being asked. Small victories. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving in the right direction. And as I sat on the back porch one evening, watching Maple laugh with the boys while I nursed a glass of whiskey, I realized that sometimes, even the worst storms leave room for brighter skies.